I was a last-minute replacement and wasn't even notified about the theme of tonight's segment.
What's the theme? What's the theme?
So this just in, the theme of the night is describing your first experience in a bar.
Oh.
Okay, so I did not come prepared to share that experience that I had doing just that. But no one wants to hear that anyway. I've had a very boring life.
We do.
Instead, we're going to discuss homework.
Oh, fun. Homework?
So let's start with the movie Rushmore by one Wes Anderson.
Yes.
Mr. Anderson and I, incidentally, went to the real Rushmore, a place called St. John's School, where the movie was set. He and I were 7-8 years apart, so we never crossed paths or anything. But he got a number of things right about our alma mater, and that it was very private, very khaki, very white, and very academically rigorous. Before I went to St. John's, I was a straight A+ student with the occasional A. St. John's knocked me down a peg or two. I still did well, but I was no longer best in class. And then the roof sort of caved in right around junior year. I regularly stayed up until 1, 2 at night doing homework, only to have to get up in a few hours to report for duty. All-nighters were not unheard of, were not uncommon. I had no social life whatsoever. It was a miserable experience, a very bad year. To make matters worse, my parents had just gotten divorced. They never should have gotten together in the first place. For one thing, I wouldn't be alive talking about homework and wasting your Sunday nights. But for another, the only, as far as I could tell, the only thing they had in common was poor stress management. Their idea of dealing with stress, their solution to it was to just add more stress to the situation and hope the problem worked itself out and went away. So all this came to a head one school night in which I had an all-nighter ahead of me. I had specifically a math test the very next day. Math had always been my best subject until junior year, and I suddenly found myself on the verge of failing, despite, again, doing all I could to not have that happen. I finished my homework right around 10. This was at my father's apartment. It was just him and I. And he decides that this unhealthy lifestyle has to end right then and there. And so at 10 o'clock, right as I'm ready to start preparing for this critical math test that would define the rest of my life, he insisted that I turn off the light and call it a night. Despite my please, Father, let me further my studies. But he would hear none of it. To bed I went, to bed he went. I waited until I heard snoring. I turned the light back on and proceeded to get back to work. He must have sensed that this is what I would resort to, and so, sure enough, right around midnight, he got up and barged into my room, and busted. He was pissed, just pissed. Now, I've never been a parent before, but I have to believe as problem children go, I was a pretty benign case. Was I doing drugs, hanging out with the wrong crowd? No, I was being studious. So, light went out, he went back to his room, back to bed. Waited until I heard snoring again, and I had one last gambit up my sleeve, and it was to take my act into the bathroom and pick up where I left off. He'd never suspect someone would do something so ridiculous. So there I was, I had my items, my study materials scattered on the bathroom floor. And before long, wouldn't you know, I heard rustling off in the distance. So I turned the light off, thinking he'd never discover me. He'd never go in here. And sure enough, he did. Opened the door, turned on the light to discover his son laying on the floor playing possum with papers and books scattered around him, right next to the commode at 4 a.m. So my gig was finally up. I did do what he asked, and I don't recall how. I doubt I did well on the math test the next day. It wouldn't have mattered had I stayed up longer or not. And to be honest, after all this time, I still can't decide who's the crazier of the two of us. Neither of us come out looking good from this. So for all that Mr. Anderson got right about our alma mater, he was wrong in that the real Rushmore was not this nostalgic paradise where that was populated by stylized human beings. Rather, it was a white privileged house of horrors that tore families apart in the jaw. And the next day I went to a bar for the first time in my life.